This is a document that really meticulously details the current operational and, well, the economic status along the eastern flank. And it's a fascinating report, actually, because it manages to convey this sense of intense, continuous activity, while simultaneously reporting a kind of general calm. This contradiction really is where our central question comes from today. Does the extensive data in this report primarily demonstrate achieved operational stability, through robust procedural discipline? Or does it actually reveal a persistent, high-risk, fragile equilibrium that's only sustained by maximum, perpetual resource commitment? So I'll be arguing that the evidence strongly confirms that procedural discipline has, in fact, successfully institutionalized and managed risk. And the result is measurable, sustainable stability for core operations and, critically, for the stakeholders involved.
And I'm going to be taking the opposing view. While I absolutely see the procedural control in action, it's undeniable. I believe this control is so demanding and the resource intensity needed to maintain it is just so immense that the situation is, well, it's better defined as a fragile equilibrium. It's essentially a highly maintained holding pattern, one that's constantly threatened by underlying systemic vulnerabilities.
Right. So my position is really founded on observing the verifiable, the successful outcomes that are detailed right there in the material. When you read that phrase, calm by procedure, well, that's basically the thesis in a nutshell. We see the direct results. No fresh Allied airspace breaches overnight, steady combat air patrols or CAP orbits on key defensive arcs like the Baltic and Carpathian. This operational success, it isn't random. It's systemic. It is stability realized through implemented policy. And furthermore, the report shows operational planning is proactive. It's sophisticated. I mean, just look at procurement. The early tranches of the SAFE initiative, they're converting into signed buys for absolutely crucial assets: sensors, jammers, shore rod systems, short-range air defense. And importantly, these come with binding monthly delivery service level agreements, or SLAs. Now, that is institutional commitment. That's long-term planning. It's with penalties for late delivery if you're just reacting hysterically to, immediate instability. You do it when you're building a permanent, managed defense apparatus. And I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on the economic indicators too. The report notes that the key regional currencies, the Polish zloty, the Hungarian forint, the Romanian leu, they're described as range-bound. Critically, it says front-end investors are watching EU prints, not security noise. Now, that tells us something very important. The market has successfully compartmentalized the security environments. That insulation, that ability to separate core financial performance from military tensions, well, that's arguably the highest form of stability you can achieve in a contested environment. And the logistics sector itself reflects this managed risk, functioning, as the report says, on a regular cadence.
I have to say, I find that interpretation of stability highly optimistic, maybe even bordering on wishful thinking. You're focusing entirely on the result, the quiet, the apparent calm, but you seem to be ignoring the staggering cost that's required to purchase that quiet. The absence of breaches isn't stability in itself. It's the immediate return on a maximum, continuous, frankly, exhausting investment. The report clearly documents the requirement for layered capes, short notice QRA, that's quick reaction alert, meaning jets scrambling almost instantly just to respond to probes, and a very tight detect, decide, defeat loop that's required simply to handle small, often inexpensive UAVs. Now, this level of persistent, high-tempo vigilance, it defines continuous stress, not stability. I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the system has achieved true stability when these core vulnerabilities persist so clearly. Consider the infrastructure challenges mentioned. VASC stays the soft spot for EWGNSS noise. Okay, so electronic warfare noise messing with navigation systems. This forces critical civilian assets, trucking and aviation, to, and I quote, continue degraded mode navigation 30 to 90 minutes after sunset. For anyone less familiar, that means when GPS gets jammed or spoofed, these transport assets have to switch to less precise backup systems like inertial guidance. requiring essential transport to operate under these degraded contingency protocols for, potentially an hour and a half every single night in known spoofing pockets. That's a major operational limitation. That is managing fragility day in, day out. It is not stability. And moreover, the sensitivity of the whole situation is exposed by the operational framework itself. The rules of engagement, the shoot if inside ROE unchanged remains highly sensitive, highly tuned. That underlying threat profile, demanding maximum resource commitment just to maintain the status quo, well, that is the very definition of a fragile equilibrium. And the quick insight map in the report sums it up perfectly, doesn't it? Treat the flank like winter ops. Winter operations are inherently high difficulty, high risk, high maintenance affairs. They represent mandated upkeep, constant effort, not a return to anything resembling operational normalcy.
Okay, let's maybe move into how we interpret that operational discipline and the necessity of this ongoing mitigation you're highlighting. I do hear your concerns about the intensity, absolutely, but the ability to systematically manage that intensity, well, that's the key differentiator for me.
But I'd counter that the reported actions actually prove the instability of the threat model. The mitigation efforts you praise look like perpetual defensive maintenance to me. I mean, why are we circulating the V1.2 TTP pack for counter UAS? That's Tactics, Techniques, and Procedures version 1.2. And why are we still trialing sensor plus jammer pairs at critical infrastructure, specifically real hubs and airport perimeters now? If the environment were truly stable, wouldn't the countermeasure requirements be, largely fixed? Instead, we're still updating our basic manuals and validating fundamental sensor pairings. It suggests the system is still actively chasing an evolving threat, not comfortably containing a known one. And we really can't just overlook the genuine life-threatening edge cases mentioned. Things like spoofing overlapping medevac. That is not some minor commercial buffer we're talking about. That's an unmitigated, high-consequence risk where electronic warfare interference is actively endangering medical evacuation flights. That kind of incident, even if rare, it highlights the deep fragility that persists when the system gets stressed at the edges.
I would actually argue that the systematic approach to these evolving threats is precisely the sign of stability through sophisticated competence. You call it chasing the threat, I call it institutional maturity. If this environment were truly fragile in the way you suggest, the reaction to needing a V1.2 TTP update wouldn't be this methodical circulation. It would be, frankly, panic buying and rush deployment of maybe untested equipment. Instead, look at the procurement reports again. They indicate highly mature planning. Framework contracts now dominate the one-off buys, and penalties for late deliveries are standardized. This demonstrates a strategic, long-term commitment. The alliance is systematically addressing known vulnerabilities. They are effectively converting localized micro-threats, like, defining specific GNSS advisories and NOTAM timing, into a demonstration of macro-layer stability and overall alliance credibility. Stability is the systematic capacity to absorb and proceduralize these risks, not some unrealistic expectation that all threats will just magically cease to exist. Okay, you've really hit on the core of our disagreement there. I accept that they are handling the risk systematically. My point is that this systematic capacity equals the institutionalization of permanent high-cost and permanent high-difficulty operations. They aren't achieving stability in the sense of normalcy, they are just making instability routine and, importantly, predictable on the budget sheet. Well, let's translate this resource intensity into the commercial world then. Because if stability were truly achieved, wouldn't the commercial sector revert to sort of pre-contention operational baselines? That brings us nicely to logistics and this whole definition of normalcy. And the data does show a return to normalcy where it matters most: predictable commerce. The report's punchline is clear: borders steady. Specifically, Belarus crossings are reported as near normal, with a manageable plus 10, 20-minute buffer. And rail and intermodal transport operating on a regular cadence. Crucially, the predictability of ETAs, estimated times of arrival, is being met. And that, at the end of the day, is the foundational need for all commercial stakeholders.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. Look at the insurance surcharges. The report notes they are modest and kept through month end.
This confirms that the commercial assessment of systemic risk is low enough to be absorbed as just a minor cost adjustment. Insurance companies, well, they don't price in existential risk lightly. They price in quantifiable volatility. So this data actually supports the normalcy thesis, at least for high-volume commercial operations.
I have to completely reject the premise of normalcy here. That plus 10, 20-minute buffer you call manageable, it's not a minor inconvenience. It is a mandatory systemic operational drag. It represents a permanent operational tax on every single truck and train crossing that border. You simply cannot claim normalcy when mandatory friction is baked into every single supply chain metric. And yes, the insurers are keeping modest surcharges, but they are still surcharges. They exist. They confirm systemic non-zero risk that's translated directly into commercial cost. Insurers are pricing in the cost of that required intensity. We talked about the QRA, the EW mitigation, the potential for supply chain disruption down the line. If the environment were truly stable, fundamentally stable, the market would eventually discount that risk right down to zero. It hasn't. But honestly, the most damning piece of evidence against this idea of normalcy is the mandatory use of degraded mode navigation for critical transport after sunset. Just imagine telling a pilot or a major logistics firm that their standard operating procedure involves relying on contingency backup systems every single evening because a hostile jamming signal is a known, persistent fixture of the environment. A stable operational environment does not mandate that essential transport infrastructure operates under continuous degraded conditions. That, to me, is the very definition of managing the operational limits of an inherently fragile system.
We also need to consider the procedures that have been implemented to manage perception, because that's crucial for stability too. The procedural calm is maintained partly through a highly disciplined information environment. The report explicitly notes a shift to clarity volume, the idea being that fewer, sharper alerts are actually better than a constant, noisy drip feed of information. Municipalities, it says, are sticking to single message alerts with confidence labels. This success in managing public and stakeholder perception, well, it's a key component of stability in the modern operational space. This procedural discipline avoids unnecessary drama, and it serves the stakeholders' stated need for, quote, crisp, need-to-act pings. It effectively compartmentalizes the public sphere from the underlying operational stress.
But why do they need such an aggressive communication constraint in the first place? That's the question I keep coming back to. The sheer necessity of enforcing clarity volume, of actively reducing information volume, it reflects persistent underlying anxiety. It reflects the latent risk of public panic, which these procedures are clearly attempting to suppress or at least manage, not eliminate. If the situation were genuinely stable at its core, the need to actively manage the narrative around the low hum of NATO escalation, well, it would naturally dissipate over time. Instead, the procedures seem designed to constrain the natural flow of information, which, let's be honest, is a classic response when you're managing a tense and fragile environment. You're managing the public's perception of stability, yes, but you are not addressing the underlying reality that necessitates such management. And the core issue, I think, is revealed in the report's own final assessment on this front. The quiet isn't presented as a natural state. The sign-off line says it all. Quiet isn't luck, it's upkeep. That phrase is, well, it's a profound admission, isn't it? It recognizes that the perceived calm is manufactured, it's transient, and it requires perpetual, high-level effort, the continuous running of a maximum effort machine just to maintain it. It is the perfect encapsulation of a fragile equilibrium, where the moment that upkeep slackens, even slightly, the whole system risks failure.
I agree that the commitment to upkeep is perpetual, absolutely. But I use that exact point to support my argument for stability. Stability doesn't mean the environment is peaceful or threat-free. It means the system built to manage that environment is robust and predictable. That phrase, quiet isn't luck is upkeep, shows that the system has successfully operationalized the necessary effort. The resources are committed, the procedures are demonstrably working, and the outcomes, like no airspace breaches, predictable FX markets, are being delivered consistently. This is perhaps a high-cost stability, I'll grant you that, but it is stability nonetheless. So, in light of this rigorous discussion, I would reaffirm that the preponderance of evidence, as I see it, supports a state of effective operational stability. The procedural approach has successfully internalized the immense risks inherent in operating on the eastern flank and, crucially, has managed them. This allows key indicators, currency markets, procurement SLAs, the steady rail cadence to operate with predictability. The disciplined application of resources has delivered what the report calls calm by procedure, demonstrating that the system is robust precisely because it's designed to manage the very disruptions you cite and manage them efficiently.
And I'll reiterate my position. The material details a highly optimized, yes, but ultimately high-cost holding pattern, and we should be careful not to confuse that with true inherent stability. The necessity of constant layering, from micro adjustments to macro strategy, the systematic management of specific EW hotspots during dusk windows, the persistence of commercial insurance surcharges, and that continuous effort summarized simply as upkeep, all of this shows that the situation remains a fragile equilibrium. Constant maximum effort is the only thing preventing operational failure, proving the environment remains fundamentally unstable without that staggering ongoing resource deployment.
Well, this conversation certainly illuminates that whether one views the region as stable or fragile really depends heavily on the frame of reference you choose. Do you prioritize the end result? No Allied airspace breaches and predictable commercial freight? Or do you focus instead on the staggering cost and complexity required to achieve that result, the constant QRA footing, the mandatory degraded navigation protocols, the continuous institutionalization of countermeasures?
Exactly. The source material offers incredibly rich detail on the implementation of modern risk management, and it suggests, quite powerfully perhaps, that stability and fragility might, in this specific operational context, simply be two sides of the same highly structured, highly demanding reality, a reality that demands perpetual vigilance and, frankly, an enormous resource commitment. There is certainly more to explore in the balance between that perceived normalcy and the underlying operational intensity documented so well in this report.